when I first visited this monastery, I thought, oh my gosh, here is a traditional museum, or the monastery is an indigenous model of a museum for people here, that it has served very similar functions of people bringing things to the museum and donating them, or to the monastery, so that the monks and the abbots can take care of them. And things that they value for whatever reasons, they have value for them. So here's an indigenous model of a museum. Now monasteries are developing museums as community museums and community centers, but this is an extension of an older tradition that already existed. They're just taking the modern idea or label museum and putting it on the monastery. A curator in Western museology is someone who takes care of collections and does research and makes exhibits and writes books and is a scholar usually, as well as a technician. And as I have here though, the original derivation, it comes from the word Latin, curare, to take care of, and traditionally that has been priests, religious, ritual specialists, religious specialists. And so I think that the monks are perfect examples of traditional curators. This is a slide from last year's field school when yesterday we couldn't tell if the weavers still have that other space for weaving, because now it's been moved underneath the house, which is again a space that's been created. Traditionally, that was the space where weaving happened, as he explained. So again, a space that's been created for curating, teaching younger people how to weave, passing on knowledge, a curatorial space, a museological space. And here he is from last year. I just want to try to point out how indigenous curatorial methods overlap with definitions of ICH. Practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, and skills, that the way people have developed, they have bodies of knowledge and developed skills for taking care of things that are important to them. Instruments and objects, just like in Western museums. And transmitting from generation to generation. In Western museology, we talk about cultural heritage preservation. Well, in simplest terms, preservation just means transmitting culture through time. So all the different ways that people have created all the different concepts. And then, as I mentioned earlier, so indigenous curation can be both a form, an example of ICH, but also a way of safeguarding it. So what I try to do in terms of the role, what I'm trying to stress is that we integrate indigenous, local, whatever term you want to use, curatorial methods and concepts of cultural heritage preservation and models of museums into, well, the local community museum or whatever structure you're using, that we integrate that. We recognize that those have value and need to be preserved in addition to the objects and the things. The knowledge of how people care for them, how people classify them, how people store them, all those things that we identify with core museum activities. So integrating or using indigenous curation is a way that museums, or a role that museums can play in safeguarding ICH, as well as using what I call appropriate museology. And basically, it's just like appropriate technology, which is something that's very common in international development work. We've recognized that you can't just take a tractor that they use in the cornfields of Iowa and move it over to Java and say, okay, now there's going to be greater, well, corn and rice are very different kinds of, not a good analogy. But anyway, that you can't take one technology that works in one place and expect it to work in another. We can't take the model of a museum from London, and even though we've been doing that for a long time, right? We've been transplanting the Western Museum model and reproducing it all over the world. But for those of us who study comparative museology and look at, well, this is not working in this context because culturally it doesn't fit, technologically it doesn't fit, people don't have the skills to use this technology. How can we take certain museum concepts and methods and adapt them to a particular cultural context and socioeconomic conditions? And that by definition, it's a bottom-up, community-based approach that uses local knowledge and assets and resources and mixes them with professional museum methods. The whole point is that Michelle brought up, we have a paradox, another contradiction of cultural heritage preservation. We often end up destroying or erasing, disappearing the very thing that we are supposed to be preserving. When we take a model of a museum, a school, a hospital from one country or one context and impose it in another without thinking about, well, how does this work or not work in this context, we run the danger of disappearing, for example, indigenous curatorial methods or concepts of heritage preservation. We replace them with another model because we think that model's the best, or that model is professional. That's what the experts tell us we need to do. This is the right way, the best way to do it.